Why would they be concerned about climate change? The answer: climate change could seriously affect our global and national security. And that's our top story. A new battle is underway, a campaign not to conquer, not to destroy, but to protect America and its borders from a global threat. Climate change.
At first thought, you wouldn't think that climate change has anything to do with national security. But when you think about it, it's going to have everything to do with it. It is going to happen over a long period of time, and it's going to affect every nation on Earth.
Retired Vice Admiral Richard Truly is part of a platoon of former U.S. generals sounding the alarm on climate change. Once a shuttle astronaut, he has seen how vulnerable the Earth is.
When you look at the Earth's horizon from space, you see an incredibly beautiful but very, very thin line. That thin line is our atmosphere. And the real fragility of our atmosphere is that there is so little of it.
Since the 1990s, reports commissioned by the Pentagon have linked climate change, more fires, more hurricanes, more drought, with national security issues.
The consequences of continued global warming are going to be profound. They are so significant that you have to rank it as a national security challenge.
This latest caution to U.S. interests comes from the Center for Naval Analysis and its appointed Military Advisory Board.
From the beginning, we recognized that we were not scientists, even though we listened over a period of 8 or 9 months to a lot of science. But the one thing as a group that we did feel like we knew something about was national security and military security and how risk from any direction can affect that.
In their 2007 report, the former high-ranking military officials explain climate change is a global threat multiplier, presenting a simple domino theory for domestic and world conflict.
Climate change causes environmental problems that in turn causes social stresses that in some cases could cause security problems.
For example, in America's recent history, from the Dust Bowl in the 30s to the widespread western drought of the 80s and Midwest floods of the 90s, changes in climate misplaced tens of thousands of people. Today, the threats continue. Example, rising sea levels.
When sea levels rise, even at the lower end of the projections, they are going to affect river deltas. And as an example, in Bangladesh, it's the most densely populated place on Earth. And even a small sea level rise is going to push tens of millions of people back from the sea.
Last November, a devastating cyclone hit, driving refugees toward the higher ground of neighboring India, an already densely populated country. The influx could be politically destabilizing and disastrous. And higher seas may threaten strategic U.S. naval bases at sea level, as well as military staging hubs.
For example, Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean that is not on a mountain. It's very close to sea level, and we are very dependent in the Middle East on that base.
Closer to U.S. shores, climate change may also mean an increasing number of storms in the Caribbean, which could lead to environmental refugees heading to the nearest higher ground, the U.S. coast. And perhaps the biggest threat, 1 million square miles of new open water at the top of the world.
This is a satellite image taken of the Northwest Passage up in the Arctic only a few days ago. And even though there's a good bit of cloud cover in here, there is ice left. But on this day of the year, several decades ago, this would have been ice-choked. And in the future, this is going to be a blue water, navigable ocean and passage. And because of all the nations involved in the Arctic, it's going to present us with issues, political issues, naval issues, that we are going to need to deal with, and it's all being driven by the change in the climate.
I wish every American could look at that glacier field in northwest Canada, because they've measured how much those glaciers have gone back over the last 100 years, and it's frightening.
In what may be a start of a new Cold War, Russians fired a warning shot last summer when they claimed Arctic oil and gas, no longer trapped in ice, as theirs and theirs alone.
Even here in developed countries, right here in Colorado, we face water issues every day. But in areas like the Middle East or in sub-Saharan Africa, it's a life and death matter.
Dr. John Ackerman, a professor of national security studies for the Air Force, is an expert on climate change.
How is the DoD going to approach the future to see how we could attack the climate change issue? We have a world where there's lots of have-nots and a few haves. Equity disputes are not only at the heart of terrorism, but they're also at the heart of the climate change problem, because the nations that are most vulnerable to climate change are the poorest nations.
Nations like Indonesia, where killer waves hit in 2004.
And so we came in there with the single objective of helping them overcome the tsunami, help them rebuild their population and their infrastructure, and we were welcomed and we were considered as heroes for the efforts that we did.
Not so in drought-ravaged Somalia years earlier.
We were seen as an invader and also depicted as an invader. We encountered a very tribal society that had already broken down to the point where there was a failed state.
The dominoes had already fallen in Somalia: drought, failed state, war. And now in Sudan's Darfur.
Darfur is already considered an environmental disaster, and also many scientists consider it an example where environmental insecurity has contributed to conflict.
The question now, is the Pentagon ready to move on climate change?
I think it's beginning to become a security issue in the uppermost ranks, up there with the war on terror, at least an inkling, perhaps, of that happening.
The retired military panel wants more than an inkling. They want action.
We're past time for trying to get a grip on this.
We think that we need to, the military and the national security apparatus needs to study it, understand it, and play games about what might happen. Because some of these areas of the world are the very areas that do breed terrorism.
Congress responded with legislation last year ordering spy agencies to study the impact of global warming on national security.
We're not crying wolf. Climate change is going to cause environmental stresses and social stresses that it's going to breed trouble.
For more now on the link between climate change and national security, we're joined by our climate expert, Dr. Heidi Cullen. And Heidi, a lot of people may be asking, there's always been climate variability throughout history. So why does climate change now threaten national security? I know that you're asked a lot by people, why does it matter? There's always something.
Right, what's the big deal? Well, I think it's a great question. And ultimately, I think what reports like this one showed is that climate has kind of always been an Achilles heel, and we don't necessarily give it the respect that it deserves. When you look back through history, you can actually see how ancient civilizations actually collapsed because they weren't able to adapt in time to a changing climate. For example, the Mayans and the Anasazi cultures, they both had to deal with long-term droughts, and they were simply unable to adapt to them in time, and their civilizations actually collapsed. And now today, when you have climate change in the mix, what it does is it makes that variability more extreme, and it works its way into all of these other problems that we have in the world today. So, when you look at issues like in Darfur or in Sudan, the climate ends up becoming, like they say in the report, this threat multiplier. It makes the situation worse.
And we have a population explosion today.
6.7 billion people.
Absolutely. A new study, a British think tank, said that by 2050, droughts, food shortages, and flooding will lead to mass movement of up to 200 million environmental refugees. And the concern is there will be knee-jerk decisions about protecting borders, and that won't do anything in the long term.
This is all about long-range planning. And for example, they talk about droughts and heat waves. In 2005, we had this epic heat wave in Europe. Over 35,000 people died. Well, some scientists did climate modeling study looking at greenhouse gas emissions over time, and what they project is that by the year 2040, that European heat wave will happen on average almost every year. So climate change becomes this issue where we've got infrastructure decisions we need to make.
Heidi Cullen. Thanks, Heidi. And up next here, Dr. Marcus.